All right, we're back with a continuation of the prior tutorial that was on creating a variety of landscapes. Now I've redone it all here. It's a different landscape, but I wanted to show you what I've done since then, which is to make a much slower animation. You may have noticed it takes a while to render these frames, even when it's running on the GPU. If you have very high level of anti-aliasing and the self shading or shadow cast and all sorts of visual effects, it can still take 2-3 seconds, maybe 5-6 seconds per frame. And if you want to render a 10-second long animation, such as something like this one here with 200 or 300 frames, this one has 434 frames, and you want it to be a very nice, smooth, slow animation, you know it's going to take, I don't know, half an hour to render, perhaps more. And you may just not have that time, or maybe you're doing experiments and you don't want to really wait for all these frames to be rendered. Well, you don't really have to render them each and every one. Right? You can render keyframes. You can render 1 out of 10 and then do an interpolation. But you don't want to do an interpolation that's just a frame blending, because especially with high contrast arrays, you'll see a lot of flickering. You'll see a lot of texture noise. So what you want to do to get this effect is using motion estimation, right? A motion estimated interpolation. And so I want to show you how to do that. Let's see what we have here. We have here a short animation. I'm not sure if that's the whole thing. Let's go and see it here. Yeah, this one has just 44 frames. So I rendered this very short sequence over 44 frames, and it plays pretty fast, right? So there's about a second and a half. Right? Playing at 30 frames per second, we have a second and a half. Now I'm going to go and slow this down, right? So to render this, it probably took, I don't know, with 5 seconds per frame times 40, about 200 seconds divided by 60, about 3 or 4 minutes, right? So that's okay. We can wait for that, but we don't want to wait for half an hour. The question now is, can we make up the difference here by simply doing the motion interpolated motion estimated interpolation, and do that in a fraction of the time it would have taken if we had actually rendered each of these frames? Right? And I think we can. So here's what we do. We'll go to the filters and animated, and this is something you can only do on Howler. You don't have the animated features in PD Artist. So if you want to do this animation kind of thing, you need to use Howler and look for the motion prediction module. Right. So with the motion prediction module, make sure first, if you're experimenting, you don't know quite yet what you want to do, set the dry run. And then instead of the fudge factor of, well, let's try it first with the default settings, right? 3 dry run, go. All right, this will make it go from 44 frames to 127 frames. And for the most part, it's pretty decent, pretty fast. If the movement is not too fast already in the original, it's actually going to be fine. You'll see a bit of noise here in the lower left side. There's quite a bit of rapid changes, right? So if it moves too fast, then it's a little bit challenging. You see some noise here, and there's going to be edge conditions too. So you may need to increase the search distance for these tiles. But remember, the motion prediction module is basically putting these little squares all over and slapping a motion tracker on each of those, and then trying to detect where did it move. Where is each of these squares moving on the next frame, and then does a linear transition and interpolation with a blending transition as well. So it kind of morphs it from one tile to the next. And what you need to do sometimes is increase the search distance for those. But another thing you may want to do is decrease the fudge factor. Right? So the fudge factor is something you use a fairly high value if you have very noisy video. Noisy meaning like you've recorded video, maybe in dark condition or with very high speed sensitivity, high ISO rating, and there's just pixel noise, right? Pixels are constantly going a little bit brighter, darker, and it's a very noisy scenario. Or think, for instance, the surface of the ocean, and there's wave ripples, and it's constantly changing, even if you don't move the camera. There's a lot of noise. Those you may not be able to track. because they're just gone from one frame to the other. So there is nothing to track, and in those cases, you're better off just doing a frame blending, and this is kind of what allows you to kind of find a fudge in between the two. But if you insist that this is really a rock solid scene, and you should be able to find and track individual blobs here or patches, no matter where they went, you should be able to say, well, let's go down to one. Very small, very high quality, looking for very high precise placement, right? And then that should reduce further it will increase the time it needs for finding them, including, especially with the search distance increased, but it should improve the quality, and you see probably less of the ripple noises and artifacts. There still will be an edge of about 12 or 20 pixels along the edge around it, depending on these values. But once you've done that, you can do an even better refinement pass and uncheck the dry run. Or perhaps actually, if you want it slower, instead of 3 tweens, give it 5. Always do a test run here to see that it's not going too high on the total frame count. Because somewhere around 600, you're going to run out of memory at this size. Now, if you have a smaller dimension on the window, on the image, then you can go to higher frame count. So I'm going to go with 5 at this time. And it's not using the refinement pass. It doesn't seem like it needs it. This is good. Let's render this once, and then heck, what the hell? Let's just stop it and uncheck the dry run and go. All right. So we have 44 frames turning in 211 frames, and it did not take half an hour to render all this. Right. Thanks to the motion prediction module, we can significantly cut down the time it takes to get a decent render out of this. Instead of just 1.5 seconds rendering and fast movement, we now have 210 divided by 30, about 7 seconds, right? And here they are. All right, so that's one thing. Then the next thing we might want to do is, well, let's crop a little bit. First of all, the first frame is always a copy of the last one. At the end of the motion prediction module, you'll want to toss this first frame. And then you may want to crop a little bit and perhaps get rid of the edge condition, and retime even more to make an even slower area, slower motion that lasts even longer, but maybe on a smaller part of it, maybe different aspect ratio. So let's go grab the crop tool. There it is, and crop in here a little bit. Perhaps also make it a little bit smaller this way, and then just find the area of interest. Maybe we want something like this. All right, something like that. Maybe a little bit more vertically. There. You can scrub here to see if that's really capturing what you want. Maybe you want it a little bit more on the right side. There. And then right-click and crop. Now, once you have that new, smaller version, you can... first of all, one thing I would recommend is you double-check the dimensions you have at this time. Check image info, and if you have odd numbers, which can happen, right? And there it is, 885. If you have odd values for the width or the height, make sure you resample it to a nearby even number, let's say 888, and make sure this is also a decent number. 516 might be better. It doesn't matter if we change it a little bit here. Let's uncheck the constraint and say 16. This is only 1 or 2 pixel difference, but it's going to make a world of difference for saving it to AVI, or being able to actually convert it and export it to something that Windows Media Player can play. Most media players really are not happy if the dimensions are not compliant with multiple of 8, multiple of 4, or at least an even number. So you'll be better off that way. So we have now here an animation that looks very nice, but we're not quite done yet. And so the next thing we want to do is slow this down even more. All right, so what we'll do is actually we'll say, well, we don't need this initial phase. Maybe we need it only from here on. So let's go select that. We're going to select the group of a block of frames here from the in marker to this out marker. So let's say this is the out marker. Go over here, in marker, and you see how it selected all these frames. Right click, delete block. Right, so we have a block of frames that are deleted, and we can do the same thing at the end. If we are too close here, maybe we need to go only about this close. Let's say that's the in marker, set the out marker, and right-click delete block. So now we have even fewer frames. We are back down to about 90 frames. All right, play that. Here are our 90 frames. And so now what we want to do is use the motion prediction module one more time. Right? And every time you do this, by the way, you may want to save them as AVI with the lossless codec, something like Lagarith. But I'm going to go to the motion prediction module once more. And this time I'm going to, again, do a dry run and say, okay, we have about 90 frames. I want 5 or 6 times as many. 6 times 90 should give us about 540. Give or take a few, right? It's not a precise exact value. There's a couple of rounding truncation things happening, but we want again the high quality and go. And so yeah, we get about 529, and it's already a fairly smooth animation, so it's gonna have no problem at all finding the movement and the predicted interpolation between the tiles that we are seeing. And if you doubt it, if you want some additional quality, you can go to the refinement pass. I'll skip it here. There's really no need for that. Let's go dry run and go. So 529 frames coming our way that are being produced in just a matter of 2-3 minutes, whereas each of these frames would have taken probably 5 or 6 seconds to render. If we had to render 500 of those, it would have taken, my math is not so good this morning. I had just 1 cup of coffee, but I would say it would have taken half an hour at least. So we are done with this. Let's go delete the first frame, which is always a copy of the last frame, and enjoy this beautiful, very slow animation that we did in just a matter of a few seconds, a few minutes maybe. It takes longer to talk about it than to actually do it. So practice, practice, practice. Enjoy this, and then start compositing some other stuff on top of it here, because you know this is going to be your background scene. On top of it, there's going to be some other action in the foreground. Maybe you need this to be blurred a little bit. Add some fog, add some sunset coloring, all sorts of other things you might want to add to that. So have fun. Thanks for watching. Thanks for howling and waffling.